We're talking with freelance writer Keith Spencer. It seems to me, they've described how they would set up these exclusive camps. The implicit assumption behind those 10 principles was, everybody can go everywhere and so on. But soon they were setting up these camps where basically you couldn't get in without invitation, and maybe they were closed off in some way. And so there was exclusivity, and there was enormous privilege and comfort. It had a kind of do-it-yourself, DIY ethos to it, and all of a sudden people were paying others to do everything in order to let them live in a life of luxury. So I guess the people running it were just like not paying attention, or didn't think it was a violation of the principles, or what?
Well, you could definitely make the argument that at the institutional level, Burning Man, it's been occupied by a lot of these wealthier people. This guy Jim Tannenbaum, who's the venture capitalist, who kind of a lot of the ire has been directed towards recently, and he actually resigned from the board after this whole thing happened, where he hired some people to build the camp for him, and they were working like 20 hours days, and everything was a mess. But people like him are the type of people that are on the board. I mean, a lot of the founders have been totally fine with having some of these kind of like I think they kind of like the Silicon Valley star power. I mean, it's a nonprofit. It's not a democracy, and I think that's one of the kind of interesting things that you see. I mean, so this is why I wrote this article about Burning Man, is because I think it kind of reflects a lot of things that are happening in our day-to-day society, where like a lot of the sort of wealthiest people in the country, they won't say outright that they hate democracy, but they want to live in a world.
Well, at least one did. Peter Thiel, the venture capitalist, did say that he doesn't like democracy, that it all went to hell when poor people, he didn't use those words, but when poor people and women got the vote. So, some of them will say it, but most won't.
Absolutely. No, and there is this really kind of frightening, burgeoning anti-democratic libertarian movement that's centered in Silicon Valley, actually.
Right, and funded by it to a large extent, yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But, it's kind of like, what happens when you have a society built by democracy versus when you have one built by charity? And, in a world, or charity or donations, I should say, because in a world like Burning Man, which is, a temporary city in its own right, all the pieces are brought by the people who come. But, of course, the people who have more can afford to bring more. And then, unsurprisingly, they wield more power with the board of directors, and, they bring their sort of elitist world with them. And so it shouldn't be surprising that Burning Man is sort of the same types of social inequalities that we see in the United States. I mean, it's demographically, it's much wider. It exhibits like similar sort of income inequality, even more extreme in a sense, because there's a lot of very low income people who go, and then a small number of super rich people who go. It's unsurprising that these kind of rich libertarian types love it, because it's a world where they, can use their money to have more power. I mean, democracy is not just about bringing the small, bringing the voices of the unheard to the forefront, but it's also about making sure that the people who have too much power don't get more of a voice. And Burning Man is sort of the opposite of that. It allows those with a lot of power and money to have a much louder voice.
That's why I thought your piece was so noteworthy. We're talking with Keith A. Spencer, freelance writer, because it points out that into this vacuum, perhaps inevitably, came the domination of money and the few over the many, at least in certain ways, and a subversion of the values on which it was founded, an argument one might incidentally also make about our country. And so I thought, as an analogy, it functioned really well. By the way, parenthetically, Keith, I will say also that the creation of a large straw man who is then set on fire and burnt to a cinder is not a bad metaphor for the economics of the Silicon Valley either.
Absolutely.